Okay, so today's daf yomi is Bava Basra daf pay test Bava Basra 89. We're going to start on the fourth line where it says Simin ein ma'ainin vein gochin ba gardamin ubelitra shlosha va'eser nefesh mishkalot mimachek avalot hasulo yaseh. So the Gemara says the following: Tana Rabbana minayin shem mochkin b'mochim shegochin. So mochkin means to flatten out the product before you sell it. Vigochin means to heap it up. Now, how do we know that if it's a place where you do the flattening, that you're not allowed to sell it in a heaping manner? And how do we know if it's a place where the practice is to heap it, that you're not allowed to flatten it out? Main gochin b'makom shemochakin. How do we know this? The Gemara says, Tam Omar, Eifa Shlema. It says it has to be an Eifa Shlema. It has to be a Eifa that is Shlema, meaning to say that the pasuk emphasizes that it needs to be exact, and so therefore you're not allowed to change from the custom of the place and sell in a different manner, even if one of the parties waives it. And the reason is because even though it's not theft, but it could cause a big problem because as a result of this, maybe other people will see the measurements and they'll think that that's the practice and they won't know that there was a waiver here. And so therefore you have to be very careful. Uminayin Shem Amar, and how do we know that if he says, how do we know that if he says, Minayin Shem Amar Hareini Mochek b'makom shegochin v'lifcho minadam. How do we know if he says, "Listen, I'm going to flatten it out on a place where they heap it, and I'll just take some off the price." Hareini godesh b'makom shemokin, and I'll heap in a place where they flatten it, or hosif them, and I'll add on the price. Change shomalo. How do we know that we don't listen to him? Tam Omer ifash leimah v'tzedek. Yeah. It says Eifa Shlema v'tzedek yelach, meaning to say that the word v'tzedek is extra because it already says that the measurement needs to be shalem. So it's coming to teach us that you're not allowed to change from the practice. Tana Rabbana minayin shema einim v'malkum shemachrin. How do we know if it's a place where the practice is to measure it exactly and not to tilt the scale? How do we know that under those circumstances that you're not allowed to? And how do we know in a place where it's a practice to tilt the scale that you're not allowed to do it evenly, and you're not allowed to tilt it b'makom shemayim, where the practice is supposed to do it at an even scale? Talmud Omer, the pasuk says, Evan Shlema. It says it has to be complete Evan. Uminayin shemamar hareini ma'ayim b'makom shemachrim hu afchot ho min adamim v'hareini machriya b'makom shemayim hu hosif ha'adamim change shamlo. And Adam, he says, listen, I'll do it. I'll just add on to the money that I pay him. How do you know that that's not okay? Tam Omar Evan Shlema v'tzedek. It says a complete Shalem v'tzedek, and you have to be righteous. Meaning to say you can't change it. You can't change from the custom because it could cause big problems. Maybe someone will see this and he won't know that you're lowering the price or raising the price, and that'll be big problems. Amar Yehuda Mitzura lo yelecha b'veitcha. It says that you're not allowed to have in your house these weights that are not honest weights and measures. So what's the reason? The Gemara reads the pasuk as "L'yelecha," you won't have any money. Matam, what's the reason why you won't have any money? Mishum Eifa. The reason why you're not going to have any money is Mishum Eifa ve'Eifa, because you were two sets of weights and measures, and honest and dishonest. Therefore, you won't have any money in your house. L'yelecha b'chescha. You won't have any money. You're not allowed to have any false weights and measures in your wallet. But the Gemara reads it as you won't have any money because you have two stones. One's false and one's accurate. But if you have an accurate stone, you will have money. If you have an accurate Eifa, you will have money. Well, we read this as the rabbi's telling the bride. So it says yelach. That it says in the pasuk yelach that you should have this. This means this teaches us that you put in an inspector to make sure that the measures are accurate. and also but you don't put in an inspector to make sure that the prices are accurate. The Venecia ukimu agardamin be'elamidos be'lasharim. But the Venecia, the government, the Benesia, the leaders of the community, they actually established inspectors both for measurements and for prices. And Shmuel said to Karna, we know that Shmuel and Karna are both the leaders of the Gola. We saw this already. And one time when Rav was coming in, that in Sukkot, that Shmuel sent Karna out to greet him. So Shmuel said to Karna, "Puk tanilu ma'amidin agardim midos ve'ma'amidin agardim l'sharm." Go teach them. You're not supposed to set up a inspector for prices, only for measures. Nafak Darshu, you went out and taught them ma'amidin agardim and be'ma'midos be'l'sharm. You went out and taught the opposite. You do an inspector both for measures and for prices. Shmuel says to Karna, "What's your name?" He knew his name, but he was going to criticize him. He says, Karna, tepukle Karna be'ene. He said, let a horn come out through your eyes. Nafkle Karna be'ene. So a horn went out through his eyes. So the Gemara says, the EU command savar. Who did he hold like? Who did Karna hold like when he taught this? He taught he says, he said, good morning, Dr. Brazen. He said he taught it like he holds like the position that states that you're supposed to establish a inspector both for measures and for prices because of the liars. So now we're on 89A, around 15 lines from the bottom. Tanar Rabbanan, let's say you say to the guy, I want a litra worth of meat. Shokol a litra. The guy will give you a litra. Chatzi litra, shokol chatzi. If he asks for half a litra, he gives him half. Reveal litra. If he asks for a quarter, you give him shokol reveal litra. Gemara says, "My kamashon, what's this teaching us? Is this teaching us that we?" So what's it teaching us? The Gemara says it's teaching us that that's the lowest you go. You don't go lower than a quarter litra, because if you ask for lower than a quarter litra, it could lead to theft. Because Rashbam says the earlier generations established for measures that was the limit. Less than that you have to weigh with coins and not with weights. And if a person will come to do less than that, we don't listen to him, because maybe you come to cheat and he'll say that that's a quarter liter. Or alternatively, so that's the first answer Rashbam gives. We'll go with that. But okay, so then he gives a second answer, that you're not supposed to use a third or a fifth, because then you could also lead to a mistake. Okay. He says if you say I want 3/4 of a liter of meat, we're in 89A. You shouldn't say to them under those circumstances, shakoli shlosha, take from me 3/4 litra. But achas alashkol litra maniach reveal litra mabasar. He says, don't say if he orders 3/4 liters of meat, don't give it to him 3 1/4 pounders, but rather give him on the scale. All of it at once. You do 1 whole liter, and then you put on it a 1/4 liter with the meat, and that will make it the same. But you don't do one at a time, because if that's the case, he's going to end up being, each time you add on a little more, and it's not going to be exact, and it could cause a greater loss for the person. So now we're on 89A, around 10 lines from the bottom, Meyer. And let's say the guy says, give me 10 liters of meat. Don't give him 10 pieces of meat, and each time you put on the scale one liter, and you tilt the scale, which is the custom. So you give him 10 pounds all at once, and you do one tilting for all of them. Okay, now we're going to get into the actual scale. Nefesh moznayim tuluya ba'avir gimel tfachim. So the nefesh moznayim, this is the bolt in the middle of the scale, which is called the fulcrum. So that has to be suspended in the air 3 tefachim. V'gavo min haaretz shlosha tefachim. It has to be 3 tefachim off the ground, because otherwise it's going to hit the ground, or it's going to hit the beam from which it's suspended from. Vikana umasne shnei masar tefachim, and the beam which goes through the fulcrum and the strings which are attached to the scales together, that comes to 12 tefachim. V'shel tzamar v'shel zaganin. But if they're selling wool or glass, tuluya ba'avir shnei tefachim, then it's suspended 2 tefachim. L'gvom min haaretz shnei tefachim, and it's 2 tefachim off the ground. Vikana umasne shalat tes tefachim, and the beam and the strings are 9 tefachim. V'shel chanvani v'shel bava basra, and the shopkeeper and the Bava Basra. So what's the difference with them? That they weigh with much smaller amounts. So therefore, it's supposed to be suspended in the air less, because these are smaller amounts, and so therefore tluya ba'avir tefach gvo min haaretz tefach. It's just 1 tefach suspended in the air and 1 tefach off of the ground. The kana umisna shalosh shisha tefachim, and the beam and its strings are 6 tefachim. V'shel tortani, and if it is a tortani, this is like a metal worker who sells. So basically, is like a fine jeweler. So therefore, tuluya ba'avir shalosh eshbos, just 3 fingers. Gvom min haaretz shalosh eshbos, 3 fingers. Kana mashal ha'eni yodea, and I don't know. Says this price. I don't know what the string and the beam is. It's a very small scale. Gemara says, so the Gemara says the first scales are mentioned in the Brisa, the Mai. What are those for? Meaning to say, who are those dedicated to? Because since we counted everybody else, what are those for? So Amar Papa de Gerumi. This is talking about very big metal workers, and so therefore they large metals, and so therefore it's much bigger. Amar Rabbi Mani Bar Patish, and just like they said with respect to the fact that you can't use the scales to steal, so too they said these laws about the scale to do these exact measurements with respect to the laws of Tumah. That if the scale doesn't work like that, it's not going to be considered a utensil. And since it's not a utensil, then the utensil is not mekabel tumah. Only something that's an actual utensil is able to receive tumah. Gemara says, "My kamashma, what is this coming to teach us?" Tanina, we learned in the Mishnah, tefach. So what is Rav Mani teaching us with this teaching? This is already said in the Mishnah that if you have a string for the scale and the shopkeeper, it's a tefach, because that's the exact measurement. And we see from there that this is all the laws for all the scales, that they will not, they're not able to become tamei if they're not in this measurement. So he says, he says not only that he says this law is not only about the moznaim, about the scales, but also about the beam and the string. The lotanon, that is not listed. Tanu Rabbanan Einos and Mishkalos. So we learned that you're not allowed to make the weights lo mishal bat, not from tin, lo mishal aver, not from lead, lo mishal kistaron, not from an alloy, lo mishal sharminei matachos, but nor from any other metals, because these other metals are going to easily get diminished, and so therefore the purchaser is getting less than he thinks he's getting, because the weights are actually diminished. You can make it out of stone or glass. You can have stone weights and glass weights. Dan Rabbanan ein osin es machak. You can't make the level shel delas. You can't make the level that you use to level out the measuring utensil from a gourd. Why? Mimneshu kal, because the gourd is too light. It's not going to press it down well, and the seller is going to lose. But not from metal. It presses that too much, and the purchaser loses. Avaloseyu shall. So Avoseu shel zayis. So what he makes it from is he makes it from an olive branch, from olive wood, vishel egos, and from a type of tree that produces nuts, vishel shikma, vishel esproa, and from sycamore and from esproa. I think we've said in the past is that it's like a boxwood. I don't know exactly type of tree, which is very heavy, and it is exactly the proper need. Don't make the level one side thick, one side thin, because then the thin side will go in well straight into the crops and knock it down well, but the thick side won't. And when he comes to buy from other people, he'll use the thick side, and when he comes to sell it, he'll use the thin side. So therefore, that's no good. So they'll make it too heavy, and so then it won't be a proper reading. So therefore, it needs to be the same. Well, you can't level it all at once. That's good for the purchaser, not the seller. And you can't level it down little by little because that's bad for the purchaser, good for the seller. Because every time he presses it down, it makes it heavier, so it's a false reading. Every time about all these, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai said, Omer, Omer, woe to me if I say it, woe to me if I don't say it. Im Omer, if I say it, Shema Yomadu Aramayim, maybe the dishonest people will learn from me. Im Lo Omer, if I don't say it, Shema Yomer Aramayim, ain't Tamid Chacham Bekimim Asidino. Maybe the Ramayan, the dishonest people will say, oh, the Torah scholars don't know our ways, and they'll continue to do it. So if I say it, they'll learn what to do and to steal. And if I don't say it, they'll think they can get away with it. So Ibayu, so the Gemara wants to know, Amra lo Amra. In the end, did he say it or not? Amra of Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Amra, he did say it. Mehai Kra Amra, this is the reason. Ki Yesharim Darkei Hashem et Tzadikim Yachobam Uposhem Mikashobam. Since the ways of God are straight. The ways of God are great, straight, and the tzaddikim will do well with it, and the sinners will stumble on it. Meaning to say, God's word's the truth, and the righteous will do well with it. The sinners will stumble. Don't be afraid to say the truth, because the sinners will use it in a bad way. Thou ought to do a sin in justice with weights and measures. You have to be honest with measuring real estate. So this is a Gemara we already had in Bamitzia. The rope expands in the winter, so you can't use the same rope that you use to measure in the winter with the same rope in the summer, because you're going to be stealing from him. Gemara says, "B'mishkal with weight, shelo yatmin mishkalos of the milk. You can't weigh down your weights in salt, because then they become more heavy. Oh, some say it becomes less heavy. So you have to, and b'masura shelo yarsiach. You can't pour the wine very strongly into the utensil, and that will become like frothy, and then it looks like it's full, even though it's not really full. V'kav chomer, ma masura she'echad mishloshim again, it's kal chomer. What is this froth that Torah is warning us about? It's 1/36 of a lug, and it be the love Torah, and the Torah warns us that you can't do it. Kal chomer hin v'chatzi and shlichus and revius and v'lug v'chatzi lug revius v'chatzi toman v'ukla. How much more so in all these other measurements, which are much bigger? Now you have to be careful not to steal a hin, a half a hin, a third of a hin, a quarter of a hin, a lug, a half a lug, a quarter lug, an eighth of a lug, and an ucha is 1/5 of a lug. So how much more so do you have to be careful here? Also, not even allowed, forget about not using it, you're not even allowed to have this measure, which was not entirely accurate. You're not even allowed to leave in your house. You can't even leave in your house. Just having it, possessing, is a crime or a sin. I feel he of it shall raglayim. Even if it is a bowl that you're now using for urine, meaning so you're using it as a toilet now. You still can't leave it in your house. Amar Papa, well, Amar and Ela Ba'asr the Lo Chasimi. Papa said that's only in a place where the king doesn't sign the measures, because then there's a real concern that'll come to use them. But if it's a place where he signs the weights and measures, if you don't see a proper signature on it, he won't use it. So then you can keep it. So the Gemara says, and even if it's a place where they don't sign it, we only say you have to be careful not to possess it if it's a place where there aren't inspectors who come. If there are inspectors, but then there's no concern. The Gemara says, that's what our Papa said, Velohi, but we don't agree with this. Zimnin the mikre bein hashmashos, so mikre v'shakal, because sometimes a guy will come to you Friday afternoon, he's desperate. He says, I need a pound of sugar, and you pull out your false weights. Who's going to check you then? And you steal from him. So the Gemara says, and Tanya Namiyachi Olam well Yisha Adam Mida Chasera or Yisera Besoch Beso. You're not allowed to keep weight to measure in your house. You're not allowed to keep a weight or measure that's not accurate, even if it is from urine. Even if basically it's being used now as a toilet. V'toman v'chatzi toman v'ocha and kamiyocha echa mechamisha bereviyah. It is one, and what's an ocha? An ocha is one egg and a fifth of an egg. He will stop here and pick this up, God willing, this afternoon and again tomorrow. Yashikoch to everyone.